Hello everybody, welcome back to another Pandora Hearts discussion video, this time on volume number 14. If you're new to the series, this is going to be nothing but spoilers, and also I do these videos before I read ahead in the series, so anything that I'm guessing at or thinking about, it's really because I truly have no idea what's going to happen next. So let's get right into it, because volume number 14 had some crazy things happen in it, tons of reveals, tons of things to think about, speculate over, and again, demonstrating why Jun Mochizuki is really a good writer in terms of how she sets up certain expectations and then just completely twists them around a totally different way. So in our first section of this volume, we have sort of the fallout, this initial fallout of the sort of disaster that's going on in this villa, and the second coming of the tragedy of Sablier. And we open up with Ada running with Sharon, and they're trying to sort of get to safety and escape from this. And Sharon is saying, don't worry about Vincent, he's going to be fine. And Ada's like, I'm not too sure about that. And he seems sort of out of sorts. And then she sees him, and Vincent's actually like cowering. And I'm going to say this. I thought initially that I was a little confused by this. I wasn't too sure if this section was her flashing back to what happened with Vincent, or if she was running with Sharon and then saw Vincent and separated from Sharon. Like, it's not too clear the way that it's written, and the way that it's drawn. Maybe that's up to interpretation. I'm not too sure, but it certainly seemed to me more like this was actively happening. And so we see that Vincent is basically freaking out because he's having flashbacks from the original tragedy of Sablier. And even when Ada goes to reach out to him to help him, he sees her as, now, here's the thing, guys. So to me, what he was seeing was the Duchess, would she be a Duchess if she's the wife of the Duke? I think it's the Duchess. Barma. So the one who put the whole idea in his head to open the gates of the abyss to begin with. It's her that's reaching out to him. Now, I mean, it's not drawn explicitly that way. I mean, you could, I guess, interpret her as any Shinigami, which would mean she's any Baskerville. But to me, I would say that she was drawn exactly the way that she was when she spoke to Vincent and told him, this is how you're going to save Gil, and you're going to open the door to the abyss. And so to me, he's like having such a strong flashback. He initially sees Ada's offer his help as being reminiscent of, the Duchess Barma saying, hey, let me help you. And he swats her hand away and he's like, this is all your fault. You've done this. Get out of my sight. And this is why I really like Ada. So instead of being the hurt little girl that just cries and runs away, nope. She basically goes to try and find a weapon. And she, like, Vincent comes and he sees her and sort of, as come back to his senses, realizes who she is. And she's like, I'm going to defend you, but I'll defend you from a place where you don't have to see me. And, Vincent, even though he's been saying how annoying she is and that kind of stuff, when she's threatened in the midst of that by one of the followers of Isla Yura, he calls for Echo to rescue her, and Echo takes the guy out. And then he actually knocks Ada unconscious so that she won't cause any more trouble or get into trouble. And he tells Echo to make sure that she's safe. And I love how Echo actually checks with him, just to make sure that we're making sure that we're thinking this along the same way here. You do mean like get her somewhere safe, right? Like where she won't come to harm, not just get rid of her. And it speaks so much to the relationship, I would say, between Echo and Vincent. And it's kind of fun that way. And again, like I said, I like this strength that Ada has. I mean, sure, she's not super capable. She's not this girl who all of a sudden is this incredible sword fighter. That much of it is kind of realistic to her social status and the character that we have. But it's her willingness to stand her ground and to fight. Even if she's not wanted, she's willing to do it from these different corners and, from the shadows. And I just thought that was great. And I thought it was a great statement about Ada and also about how she feels about Vincent. And I think despite Vincent continuing to say how annoying she is and everything, and that how annoyed he is, I kind of really do think that Vincent is starting to develop true feelings for this girl, that he sees that in a lot of ways she really isn't anything like the women that he's usually used and I guess generally we'd say abused. And then we finally get to see what the actual motivations are of this cult. Oz comes to, his senses, he regains consciousness. We're basically led to believe that he felt he had lost consciousness because of the crystal and his, proximity to it and the headache that he gets when he's close to it. Which, here's the thing, guys. I want to talk about this for just a second. Notice that Oz gets a headache when he's close to this thing. Do you notice that the only other person who is negatively affected by this thing is Alice, who is a chain? And this kind of keeps going back to what I've been saying about Oz these last couple of volumes is that I really don't think this kid is just entirely human. I really do think that there's something more going on here. And as I said, his such a strong reaction to this thing and a negative reaction, like a painful reaction, that to me sort of speaks more of a, being repulsed by it as opposed to you would think that Jack's soul would naturally resonate in a positive manner being close to his body. So it seems kind of contradictory unless Oz himself is a chain or is somehow like a chain. But we find out now that the whole thing behind this cult is that they've been sold this idea that the abyss is not a dark and chaotic place filled with nothing but agony and chains trying to devour your soul, that really the abyss is this happy, shiny place that with gold and everything else where the living and the dead can reunite with one another and spend eternity in happiness. And this is the way that, the Duchess Night Ray has been sort of brought into this cult. Elliot's mother has been brought into this cult, is that she's been sold this idea that she will see her sons again. And that all the pain and suffering in this world will be negated by the fact that she's in this grand afterlife. Which, again, I guess we could say is a bit of a political statement on the whole idea of nature and religion and promising something in the afterlife. But it's interesting because, and I mean, this is jumping a little ahead, but it is interesting because at one point, Jack does say that he was told by Glenn that the abyss was a place of golden lights and everything else before the intention of the abyss corrupted it. So, in a sense, it's not entirely based on, it sounds like it's based on what used to be the truth, but it's no longer the truth. But even Isla Yura seems to think that, if we can recreate the tragedy of Sablier, it was the tragedy of Sablier, the screwed up tragedy of Sablier, that caused this problem with the abyss and caused the abyss to become this dark place. And he thinks that by recreating it in a sense that these two negatives will somehow create a positive or will cause like a reboot. I mean, the way I look at it is it's almost like how a defibrillator works, right? It actually stops your heart to try and get your heart to resume a normal rhythm that isn't dangerous. So in this sense, he's trying to do the same thing. He's like, the tragedy of Sablier caused the abyss to go into this issue, but if we can cause another tragedy, another sort of, chaotic moment, that it should kind of reset things back to the way that it should be. But even Isla Yura himself, we find out, doesn't even give a crap about any of this, that for him, he's just selling this in order to benefit financially and everything else, and that for him, he really just wants to meet his end or face something that is beyond normal understanding. So it's almost like he's got this death wish, but for him, his death wish is that he doesn't want to just die. He wants to do it in a manner that is beyond just the general conventions and understanding of humankind. And even Oz tries to convince these people, like, you're crazy. The abyss is not like what you're saying at all. And they start calling him liar and everything else. And then we find out that Isla Yura is trying to recreate Sablier down to kind of the letter. Like, they've even kidnapped Leo to stand in as a friend because he's a friend of Oz, and because Oz is Jack, they're trying to have him stand in as the friend Glenn, right? Because it was two friends that faced off against each other. The blood of a friend was spilled. And so they're trying to recreate this thing, not just the chaos of the people dying upstairs and everything else, but also right down to the point of two friends, one of them meeting their end and having their blood spilled and their life extinguished in this whole thing. And then, of course, we have Break starting his battle against Fang and Lily. And they, I mean, I don't want to go over this over and over, but essentially what we seem to be knowing about this now is that the Baskervilles, we realize, of course, with Lily taking a bullet to the head in the last one and shaking it off, we realize that the Baskervilles are darn near immortal. And what Break sort of comes to the conclusion of is he says, you know, they are more chain than human being. He doesn't go right out and say they're entirely a chain, but he says, you know, they're more chain than human being. And so that's why they're afraid to face me, because my Mad Hatter can negate chains, can destroy chains. And so if they face me and I use the Mad Hatter, I can undo them. Like I can undo them. And so we come to this point where Break is going to face off against them. And of course he's at a disadvantage because he's near blind. And he's at this point where he's basically willing to sacrifice himself if it means that he can kill these individuals that stole Raim, that killed his friend. And then we kind of, you know, go back into the whole house, and Elliot and Gilbert are together. And I kind of find it interesting. Like, Gilbert he seems to be like this good guy, and he seems to be kind of tortured sometimes, but he's like a real pragmatist when it comes down to it, because he's like, if these kids are summoning this Humpty Dumpty thing and it's going to kill us, I'm going to just shoot these kids. And it's Elliot who stops him and is like, dude, you can't be shooting kids. And Elliot's like, and you know, Gil is just like, what, man? Like, if that's what's got to happen, that's what we need to do, right? Like, them or us kind of thing. And it ends up being Vincent who helps him out in that regard and uses his dormouse to put the kids to sleep. And, you know, they decide that, okay, the three of them now, Vincent has all this information because he tortured the hell out of one of these people. And so he's got information. So the three of them decide, okay, well, we're going to go save Leo. We're going to save Oz. And so they head downstairs into the catacombs to do that. And so as they go into the catacombs and they find Oz, and it's odd because, of course, Oz is just sitting there, like not being held hostage per se. And, you know, they say that Alice and Leo have been taken, so they all decide to kind of go ahead. We've switched back to Break, and like I said, he's basically given up. He's like, I'm just going to use my powers to their full extent. And what I found interesting is that he seemed to have this really great regret that he wasn't going to be able to fulfill the wish of the intention of the abyss. And like, he asks that she forgive him. And I kind of wonder, I mean, Break, like in this volume, Vincent himself even thinks to himself that Break realizes he's in league with the Baskervilles. And he's trying to think, why is it Break hasn't tried to stop me? Is it because he doesn't have enough evidence? Is it because he has ulterior motives himself? Even he kind of wonders what Break's whole point in all of this is, and why he seems to be playing different sides and letting people get away with things that seem contrary to his alliances. And it all seems to boil down in this moment when we see him having this regret that he cannot fulfill the intention of the Abyss's wish, that it all seems to be for her. And we already know that he has these great, strong feelings for Sharon. We know that he has these feelings of deep friendship for Raim. I mean, he's basically throwing himself to death to avenge Raim. And this whole thing, though, it's all about the intention of the Abyss with him and fulfilling her wish. And I wonder why that is, you know? I mean, like, we think, like, natural human instinct is to say whatever the hell you can if it means that you're going to save your life, right? Like, I mean, that's just a natural human thing to do. And yet, whatever it is that she asked him to do seems to have made enough impression on him that it wasn't just an empty promise in order to try and escape, that he sincerely wants to fulfill her wish, even though what he wanted to accomplish, which was saving his master's family and everything, even though that went kind of horribly wrong. So I'm really curious to know what the intention of the Abyss wants. And I mean, it seems to be a lot. I mean, my initial thought would have been it's Jack because, the whole tea party and Jack's coming and everything else, and how much she freaks out when Vincent's like, Jack is dead. But, I think it's more than that. I really do. I think it's more than that. I'm very curious to find out what she could have asked him to do that would make such a huge impression on him when we have seen him being basically such a strong individual that really cares very little for the thoughts and desires of others. But in the end, it's Gilbert that saves his ass. And I really liked this whole exchange between the two of them. And I liked the whole thing with Brake, like, I never asked you to save me. And Gilbert's like, why should I even do what you say? And then Gilbert refers to himself as this fool's left eye. And the teamwork that they sort of do, and the fact that to cover his back, there's even a made of a show that Gilbert sort of taps into his back so that he knows he's there, right? And even though Brake has said to Gil, I'm not used to fighting with people, I may cut you down just as much as, I'm going to cut them down, right? And Gil's like, I don't care, we'll figure it out, I'll just cover your back, you do what you feel you have to do. And so he says he's going to focus his powers into his sword, and so once he strikes one of them with it, they'll die. And he goes after Lily, and Brake becomes distracted because, of course, he's relying so much on his hearing and sort of his other senses that something distracts him. And Lily pulls a gun, and then someone from the forest screams Lily, distracting her. Brake regains himself, and it's Fang who ends up taking the sword for Lily. And we do, in fact, find out that, yes, Brake's ability is completely capable of killing a Baskerville as long as he's using his chain to do it. And like, yeah, I mean, he crumbles into like he's rock, just all done. And so Lily is saved by Lottie as they flee. They escape from the area, and basically they find out that the person who called out Lily's name is Raim. The man is alive. And I kind of had mixed feelings about this. I will say that I like his character, so I didn't really want him to be dead, but so often comic books pull this kind of thing, or, even manga pull these kind of things where you think a character's dead and then all of a sudden they're not. And like, I kind of felt it eliminated a little bit of the emotional impact, both on Brake's psyche and on the story in general. But at the same time, I have to say, I was happy to see him back. We find out that it's actually thanks to what he considers his useless chains ability, which is to mimic death. But he says it's so stupid because it's not even like I heal, and I don't even know for sure when I'm going to wake up from it. So it's like, it's so faulty in so many ways, but clearly at this point it worked. He even expresses how surprised he is that it fooled Brake even. But of course he's very badly injured, and so they decide to transport him. Sharon says, she's got Equus now in, I believe she says, in Ada's shadow, and that Ada is safe. And so she sends Raim through Equus to where Ada is so that he'll be safe. Now we switch back, of course, to Oz, Vincent, Elliot. They're going after Leo and Alice to save them, to try and stop this whole ceremony from taking place. And I thought it was kind of interesting that Oz seemed to realize that the more he thought about, like, we have that conversation that he has with Isla Yura, where Isla Yura's basically reveals what kind of a slime ball he is, and that he doesn't care about these people or believe anything that he's selling them. And he realizes that the more he thinks about Isla Yura's words, that the clearer his head becomes. And to me, when I'm reading this, I'm like, it's all about anger, right? It's all about anger and, this thirsting for destruction even, and to tear apart someone for this sort of loathsome plan that they're enacting. To Oz, it's like this is giving him power, this anger, this hatred, this desire to destroy the plans of Isla Yura. It's sort of honing his mind and making him stronger. And we've seen this, right? We saw this initially. He reacted badly when he was at the magician's house, and then as he got angry and he's like, ready to chop that chick's head off. Suddenly he was much clearer headed. And we see this happening again. And it culminates with him kind of getting stuck in this whole plan. And it culminates in him talking to Philippe and telling Philippe, you know what? I'm sorry. I know that, you're living this sort of life right now where you're able to ignore the pain and everything, but I'm going to ruin that all, but I'm doing it for myself, is what he says. And then he basically tells Philippe, like, your dad's dead and you're ruining his good intentions and you're ruining the sacrifice that he made by ignoring the fact that he's dead. And the kid gets angry as all get out and summons his clone of Humpty Dumpty, which gets sliced in half because, oh yes, Oz has awakened with his scythe. And Vincent makes the comment that Oz has red eyes. Now, we know from the whole thing with like cursed kids or whatever, I can't remember exactly the term, but the whole thing about Vincent, obviously, was that he had been sort of put out because he had a red eye. It was considered really bad luck. And so I kind of found it interesting now that Oz has red eyes. Now, we can also say that a lot of rabbits have red eyes and be rabbit, right? So I wasn't sure what they were trying to convey here, that he was red eyes because he was the bee rabbit in a sense, or was it red eyes because it's somehow tied to the children like what Vincent was? And so, like, I'm kind of thinking, like, why did kids with red eyes have such a bad reputation? And was it because of something to do with the bee rabbit? Is it something to do with whatever Oz's connection to that pre-tragedy of Sablier is? I'm not too sure. I kind of got the impression that it was more about Bee Rabbit, especially because the shadow of Bee Rabbit is hanging over Oz as he moves forward. So I kind of thought it was more like that idea of like rabbit eyes, right? And Oz summoning the scythe, it reacts with Alice. Alice has been unconscious for this whole time, and it kind of wakes her and stirs her. And she finds herself really disturbed by the fact that he's using her powers. Like, it makes her cry, and she can't understand even why she's so upset. And, she realizes that this whole thing, that, this is happening and that it's wrong and that it shouldn't be allowed to happen. And so as Oz is basically about to strike Isla Yura down, it's Alice that stops him. And to me, I was kind of thinking about this. It's almost like Alice doesn't want Oz to become corrupted, right? I don't know. I don't know why that is. And I don't think even Alice really knows, because even she talks about the confusion in her mind as this is happening and why, not sure why she's feeling this way. And for her, though, it becomes apparent she doesn't want Oz to get his hands dirty. She doesn't want his soul to be corrupted by murder. And so she stops him from killing Isla Yura. Now, this is even further strengthened by the fact that Isla Yura, when he realizes the gig is up and everything else, he goes to destroy the crystal holding Jack's body, the seal, and he's stopped by a chain piercing his chest. And it's come from Oz. And Alice is like so broken at a moment where she's like, Oz. And it's Jack. And he says, it's okay, Alice. I did it. And so, again, this to me really strengthens the point. It isn't even about Oz's body per se. It's about Oz as a person. It's about his soul, if such a thing even exists. I mean, the whole idea of souls and everything else seems very odd in this Pandora Hearts. And I'm going to get to a particularly important aspect of this, because I think it's probably the most important aspect of this volume. And as I look at my clock, I've gone way over time as per usual, but I have to get this out. It's very, very important to me, because this is what the whole point of the volume is. So, Jack stops Isla Yura from destroying the seal. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, Elliot has found Leo, and it's Elliot's mother that is about to kill Leo. And even when Elliot tells her that Vanessa's been killed, she's like, well, that's too bad, but it doesn't matter because, soon we're all going to be united again. We're going to be together again because in this next world. And she goes to stab Leo, and we find out that Elliot kills her to stop her from killing Leo. Now, this is where Mochizuki, I'm like, you are so smart, and like I did not see this coming, and I feel almost kind of stupid for not seeing it coming, is the fact that we know that Humpty Dumpty can make lies in a person's mind. We know that because we see that with Philippe, right? And with a lot of the other kids. So why did I not think for a second that it was capable of doing the same thing to Elliot? And so we have this thing now where it seems that it's Elliot who has been the individual who has killed his brothers, who's basically killed the Night Ray family. Humpty Dumpty has made him forget that he's done it. But the flashbacks of blood and dead bodies that I certainly myself, I've thought this whole time that it was because of him having Glenn's soul inside of him. I thought it was a flashback from Sablier, but now, no, I think that it's a flashback to him killing his family members. And to me, I was like, this is so cool because I said in the last time, or like if I don't know if it was last volume or a volume before that, but I said, this seems way too obvious and there has to be a way that this is a red herring. Well, here it is. This is how it's a red herring. He is having a legitimate memory, but it's not for the reasons that we think it is. And we find out that essentially he himself has created the headhunter to excuse his actions and to blame it on someone else as opposed to blaming it on himself. And it seems that he became an illegal contractor when they went down into Sablier to rescue those kids. From what we can see, Elliot became very badly injured. And it was Leo who indoctrinated him into this sort of family with Humpty Dumpty so that the chain would save his life. And notice too, his incuse has traveled very far around. Like there's only like a quarter left, meaning that he's used this chain quite a bit. And then we flash to a very important scene with Glenn and Jack having a conversation. And Glenn reveals that when he transfers his soul into another body, the body that he leaves behind becomes a chain. And he reveals that Humpty Dumpty is it was the previous body that he inhabited before the one that was friends with Jack. And he makes this statement, I am sure that if I fail to transfer over into a new body, that it'll be Humpty Dumpty who finds me again. And Humpty Dumpty says to Elliot, as he's freaking out over the fact that he killed his mother, that the reason that he came out was because she was going to kill that man, meaning Leo. I think it's Leo who is Glenn, because we have this flashback where Elliot thought that he wrote Lacey. But in reality, what seems to have happened is that Elliot wrote a piece that he gave to Leo, and Leo said in return he wanted to give a piece to Elliot that just popped into his mind that he called Lacey. And so to me, it is so clear now that it is Leo who is in fact Glenn, and that Elliot has just been basically duped because of this chain that he has had within himself. Now, the interesting thing, though, about this conversation between Glenn and Jack is that it seems contrary to what we were told before. Alice, when she was tormenting Vincent about Gilbert taking the soul on of Glenn, she said that when Glenn's soul was put into another person's body, that he would basically take over, that that person would cease to exist. But Glenn's chain of events, Glenn's version of that event is very different. Glenn basically says it is all of our knowledge and our power that will go with the soul, but that the person whose body the soul is implanted to will still basically be in control. They themselves will still be themselves, but they will have all of the knowledge and the power of the Baskervilles. So to me, like, this is very strange, right? This is completely different from what we thought it was before. Like, we thought Glenn's soul would completely overpower and obliterate whoever's body he was put into, but in reality, Glenn himself is saying that no, that's not the case. Now, again, who's lying? Because we have a lot of unreliable narrators in this story, right? We know now that Elliot's completely unreliable because Humpty Dumpty has been messing with his mind ever since he made the contract. We know that Leo potentially is an unreliable narrator because Leo potentially has a lot of secrets that he's hiding. Glenn, Glenn is a very self-serving individual. Glenn has a very clear purpose, and Glenn has a plan that he wants to enact and has a mission that he wants to accomplish. He is not someone we can rely on to tell the truth, especially to somebody like Jack, who I almost get the feeling that Glenn kind of pandered to Jack a little bit and, was trying to shelter Jack from the worst parts of things. We also have this brief moment where Isla Yura, and this is one other last thing that I want to address. Isla Yura says to Alice, are you sure you're just Oz's friend? Because you seem to have a connection to a girl named Alice who was murdered by someone during the tragedy of Sablier. And this kind of clues a thing into Alice that she's like, she doesn't remember that. And again, we know that Alice has lost memories, but it's kind of interesting that she's still disconnected from that event as well, right? I had said that I wondered if maybe that her ending up in the abyss was because of that, but I don't really know at this point. And it's clear that even Alice herself doesn't know, which again is another sort of unreliable narrator because we don't know what Alice truly remembers and doesn't remember. We don't know what she's hiding. We don't know what she's revealing. We don't, like, even she doesn't seem to trust herself. And this becomes a very interesting, like, to me, that's why this manga is so cool and so interesting, is because we really don't know who to trust and we don't know what the truth is until it's eventually kind of revealed as we go along. But wow, like, this volume was just filled with some incredible reveals. And like I said, I was completely surprised by the whole reveal of Humpty Dumpty, which was so stupid of me because, again, Mochizuki's been like planting these hints right from the moment that we met Elliot. The whole Lacey, the whole remembering people dead, the whole, telling us that Humpty Dumpty can overwrite people's memories and feelings. And she's told us right from the start about what this is, and yet just totally bought it. Just took the surface value of, oh, well, Elliot didn't see an incuse, so he's not. It's, yeah, I really, this is why I love this manga. It's almost like a writing workshop in a lot of ways to me, as I work on my stuff, that to take a look at the way that she plays this, with our expectations and the way that she sets up things that are very clear and seem to fit very neatly into sort of manga anime tropes, and then twists that so that it surprises us, and it's awesome, and I love that. So those are my very lengthy thoughts on this massively important and densely filled with information volume of Pandora Hearts, volume number 14. Thank you so much if you've watched the whole video, because I know it's a long one, and one of you told me earlier, you're like, it's probably only going to get longer as you go because there's more and more stuff to talk about. And again, if there's anything I've missed, put it down in the comments. We can continue the discussion down there. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back next week with volume number 15. I look forward to seeing you in that video. Until then, bye-bye for now.